the only way that I think you can effectively police that and reach a kind of almost equilibrium of who's happy with what credible threats of violence that incentivize, what accords with your ethical theory, is not resorting to ever more escalating violence, in pursuit of ultimate victory and the monopoly, but rather shame, basically, or other more socially enforced means of punishment and reward. So that's where I kind of land on this, that's actually more important. It's a very, very pretentious way of describing politics as downstream of culture. But not just describing it, but encouraging you to take it very, very seriously. Because, if you put the requisite time and energy into creating a culture that self-enforces ethics, you don't need violence in the first place, and you can escape that loop, in theory, at least. That's my hot take.
Greetings and salutations, my fellow plebs. My name is Walker, and this is the Bitcoin Podcast. The Bitcoin time chain is 843281, and the value of one Bitcoin is still one Bitcoin. Today's episode is Bitcoin Talk, where I talk with my guest about Bitcoin and whatever else comes up. Today, that guest is Allen Farrington. Allen is a general partner at Axiom Venture Partners and the co-author of the quite famous book, Bitcoin is Venice. He also identifies as a layer 2, and that's all I'm going to say about that. Allen and I had a great conversation that meanders all over the place, from Apple to light beer to MMT to capitalism to the proper role of the state, and a whole lot more. Allen is a hilarious and incredibly knowledgeable dude, so I know you're going to enjoy the heck out of this one. Before we dive in, do me a favor and subscribe to the Bitcoin Podcast wherever you're listening, and give the show a 5-star rating. Or don't, Bitcoin doesn't care, but I sure would appreciate it. Also, just a heads up that you can find links in the show notes to get discounts on the Bitcoin-only BitBox02 hardware wallet from Bitbox Swiss, and on 5G SIM card service from Cloaked Wireless. They protect you from SIM swap attacks, and the promo code for both is Walker. If you'd rather watch this show than listen, head to the show notes for links to watch on YouTube, Rumble, and now on Nostr via Highlighter. But if you're like me and you prefer to just listen to your podcasts, I highly recommend you check out Fountain.fm. Not only can you send Bitcoin to your favorite podcasters to give value for value, but you can earn Bitcoin just for listening to this fucking podcast. And if you are already listening to the Bitcoin Podcast on Fountain, consider giving this show a boost or creating a clip of something you found interesting. Finally, if you are a Bitcoin-only company interested in sponsoring another fucking Bitcoin podcast, hit me up on social media or through the website bitcoinpodcast.net. Without further ado, let's get into this Bitcoin talk with Allen Farrington.
This makes for a good intro. This is exactly where you should start.
Well, it does. So I interviewed Jeff Booth as one of the first people I had on here, and at one point, Jeff, he's so even keeled. He's so just like, I love the way he speaks. He's this beautiful, like, calming presence that breaks things down. So he is, and it's hard to argue with that. Whereas the rest of us get a bit firebrandish at times, but at one point he's telling the story of how he kind of like got around to writing the book, The Price of Tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And he's like, Walker, the people in charge of the rules have no fucking clue. and I was like, I don't think I've ever heard Jeff say fuck before. And then later he texts me, he's like, hey, I really like the interview, but is it possible to cut out my curse word? Because I usually don't swear. I don't want to, give that. And I was like, Jeff, for you, anything. So, just cut it out. So it just sounds like the people in charge of the rules have no clue. But
have no ad break.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, have you heard of the BitBox02 Bitcoin only hardware wallet? But yeah, so sweet Jeff Booth. If only there were more of him. Like, I wish we, but
have you kept the recording though? Because you can blackmail him potentially. You've got his reputation hostage.
I've got the recording. Honestly, I was of the opinion. I was like, thinking like, Jeff, you're just showing some great emotion here. Like, if you swear, like I say fuck all the time, it starts to lose a little bit of its meaning. You know, it's like fuck, fuck, fuckity fuck. Sorry if there's any kids listening to this later. But you know, you say it enough times and it's just kind of part of the general vernacular. But Jeff, it's like, that's not a word that he uses often. So if he busts it out, you know that it was for a serious reason. You know, it was a very meaningful fuck. So yeah. But man, how's it going? How's life? I was listening to the cheat code sessions. Those were awesome.
Bedford. Yeah.
That just a great time. Had you been to Bedford before?
No, I never had. I loved that. That was the first conference I've been to in quite a while as well, and so it's super nice. It's in the UK. I think that was the main thing, which is a bit of a shame because that isn't really giving Peter any credit. Like, he obviously can't really control that. So I have other nice things to say about it, obviously, but from my point of view, oh my god, it's such a relief, because it's just not that I mind, obviously, because it is, you know, just conferences in general are fun. They're useful for work now for me as well, but you know, if I had the choice between, do I want to fly to Miami or do I want to fly to Dubai? That was the one I went to before Bedford. Or do I just want to sit on a train going through the British countryside for a couple of hours and read a book? And, you know, more importantly, actually, get the train, like walk 10 minutes to the train, no security, no, you know. So that was lovely from my point of view. But very good conference, though. Yeah, it's. I'm sure they're going to do it again, given how successful that one was. Yeah. And I'd never been to Bedford, no, so that was also a very good excuse to go. Lovely place.
I was. We were planning on trying to go to it, and then the whole had a baby thing, and so he's a little too young to travel right now. But yeah, I'm definitely going to try to go next year. It just looked like all the programming that Danny and Peter were posting on the What Bitcoin Did channel afterwards was just great. Like, I went through all of it, felt like I was there, and just awesome conversations. And I like the fact that it seemed that there were a ton of people for whom it was their first Bitcoin conference, which is really cool.
Yeah,
like that. I think that's a neat thing. Like, it's not always the case at depending on the type or the scale of a conference.
Probably
it's
the
like
cost as well, I would have thought. That's actually, it's really interesting you mentioned that. I probably wouldn't have thought of this myself, that tends to be quite well correlated with how much I enjoy it, on the basis that, you know, obviously you can always just watch the talks afterwards, right? It's never, this is kind of a cliche, right? For anyone who's been to probably more than 2 or 3, that you don't go to see the talks. Maybe to some extent you go to see your Twitter friends who otherwise, you know, you don't really have an excuse to see in real life. But I think the main thing, at least for me, what I always find by far the most enjoyable is just meeting new people who aren't my Twitter friends. And, you know, this is their only real excuse to get involved in this kind of thing. And I do tend to find that now that I've been involved for long enough and, you know, been to enough of them, that the bigger the conference is, tends to be very closely connected with how commercial it is, which tends to be connected with how expensive it is. And it just ends up drawing a different kind of a crowd, whereas this one was very purposefully, you know, very accessible, basically. Yeah. And so, yeah, by far my favorite part was just hanging out with plebs. That was great. It was the first time I'd done that in a while too.
Yeah, that's nice. Also, quick pause. I think your mic is picking up some tapping on your desk. It's just a heads up.
Shit. I think that's me. I'm just doing that instinctively.
No. It's okay, and I like the instinct. Don't throttle your instincts. Let them run wild.
I'm at a standing desk, so I'm kind of like fidget a bit.
No. You're good. You're good to go. I've honestly, the most that I sit down during the day is usually 4. If I'm interviewing somebody, I've got my very nice Fiat chair, you know, that was like built in China, ordered on Amazon. But I fucking love my standing desk. I put a little walking pad, like one of those like treadmills that only goes like a few miles an hour, and they're like, again, made in China and on Amazon.
That's cool.
But I never thought of that. It's honestly nice because it's like I've got a lot of Fiat work meetings during the day where I need to still be at my computer, but I don't want to just be static standing the whole time, and I definitely don't want to be sitting the whole time. So I'm like, oh, well, you know, I'll just start walking. And I find myself, it's like a couple hours of meetings and you've walked miles, which is kind of like it's kind of cool. It's not quite as based as the Steven
I
Lubka,
was just gonna say,
walking
Stephen would be
outside for
proud
every
of you,
meeting,
surely.
but also I don't live in Florida, so I don't have that, beautiful weather.
Well, if you do it like
365.
by the window, surely, or even just in the garden, just set up the desk in the garden.
Honestly, I hadn't thought about bringing the pad outside. There's something like a little bit sad though about like being like walking outside on a treadmill. It's somehow I don't know why it just feels like it'd be a little bit wrong. I can't quite put my finger on why it's wrong, but it just feels wrong.
I'm sure we'll ask Stephen about this because he'll definitely have looked into it. There must be a kind of an equivalent to a standing desk, but where it attaches to you. So it's like it like latches onto your hips or something, and then you can actually just walk around.
I think it was Steven who was actually telling me about some guy who did this, and he like did it as part of like a fairly scientific study about productivity, and had basically made like a harness that he could put his laptop on, but that he could walk outside with that harness, tapping away. But that just seems so cumbersome. Like if you just got the phone, great. If you just need to have some AirPods in and you're walking around talking, fantastic. But so having like you look like this kind of like guy who's like trying to live in the future. If you've got your laptop like strapped to you, it's like, oh no, this is the future, baby. But you're not like quite there. You're not fully. You're only like partially on the way to being a bionic man. It's like
I think you need like AR goggles to complete that look.
Yeah,
Still as ridiculous as possible to anyone who happens to see you, assuming you're not just in your own garden.
Yeah, speaking of AR goggles, there's been so much flack against Apple lately that I've seen. Like I saw, they launched their
because
new
of the commercial, or just in general.
I think just in general because the Vision Pro. I mean, the fact that it's so expensive, and I don't know what their sales numbers are on it. I hadn't looked into it that deeply, but I'm sure they probably still sold out of it like everywhere because it's still Apple and people will buy their products no matter what because the legacy of Steve Jobs still lives on. Like I feel like they're still like coasting on the coattails of Steve Jobs to a certain extent. But it's funny like how long you can do that and like the difference in sort of management styles from like a Steve Jobs to a Tim Cook, who Tim Cook is very much, I think, maybe more like your typical kind of MBA CEO, like coming in and I'm just not going to rock the boat too much. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, which is, still obviously they're an incredibly valuable company still. They're not going anywhere for some time. They probably won't be around forever, but none of us will. But I don't know. It's interesting to think about like once you're no longer the upstart and you become the institutional option, how that kind of changes you as an organization. And if you can ever really, if it's even possible to retain that kind of upstart outsider mentality that got you to where you are in the first place, like think different. That was their whole thing. And now it's kind of like, doesn't seem to have been a ton of different thinking recently there. I don't know if you've tried the Vision Pro. I mean, it's weird to me. They need to be like plugged in most of the time. Like we got a Oculus Quest like a couple of years ago, like beginning of the pandemic, fairly soon after they came out, and pretty much like used it for like Carla did a lot of Beat Saber on it as like an exercise, which is just like hilarious to watch. You walk into a room and somebody's swinging around. But it didn't seem like what they did was a huge like 10x on top of that. I don't know. Maybe again, just biased, and I'm like, I don't want to spend $4 or $5 or whatever it was on this thing to have me strapped into VR world. But maybe I'm a boomer.
I'm actually I'm relatively militant in my. What's the best way of putting this? Being opposed to. Certainly not all, but a lot, maybe most of the norm, certainly the whatever the trend is in, let's say, consumer tech. That's probably the best way of putting it. That I'm kind of, to be honest, a lot of it is sort of ironic, hipstery approach of like, which is a very Bitcoiner-y thing to, attitude to adopt. I think, well, this is normie-ish. This is, therefore it's fiat. Therefore I have to. Ignore it, at least for now. But no, I mean, I'd like to think there is a semi-serious undertone to it that I don't like getting so, especially with like VR and AR. I find it honestly kind of creepy. I don't want to be that disconnected from reality. I want actual reality, right? I don't want virtual reality, which isn't. That's a very hipster thing to say. Obviously, there's nothing insightful here. There's nothing. There's nothing novel. I didn't come up with any of these thoughts on my own, but I do get just kind of creeped out by a lot of it. And it's interesting too, because that's back to your original question about Apple. That, as far as I'm aware, that is pretty much the only new, or like meaningfully new, as opposed to just an iteration, product that they've had in a long time. And then what I alluded to though, because I don't know if your audience will know this yet, do you want to describe the commercial that just came out, which I only saw like a few hours ago? I think it was yesterday. I don't know when you're going to release this, but
yeah. So maybe I should. Okay, so I could probably just play the video, but again, better. It's like always better to describe why a joke is funny than to tell it. So I'll just describe it. Basically, they've got all of these different. They've got a piano and video cameras and all paint buckets and easels with art on them and all sorts of little odds and ends inside this giant hydraulic press, like a really large hydraulic press, room sized. And it just starts slowly going down and crushing absolutely everything. And lo and behold, at the end, paint squirts out. Oh, very beautiful. A little bit of paint spatter on the camera. Wow. And then what's underneath? But it's the new iPad Pro, and it's the thinnest iPad they've ever made, but also the most powerful because it has the new M2 chip in it. And imagine what people are going to create with this new iPad. And it's like, okay, like it's not a horrible ad. I mean, honestly,
I think it's a horrible ad.
Like,
I
thought it was.
You don't think that first.
Well, no, but I thought it was visually. I thought it was visually at least kind of interesting. I don't think that the ad itself was like it wasn't incredibly creative. It's like, okay, we get it. You're pressing it all down into one thing, and it's a hydraulic press, and they can compact anything down, and like, yes, I get it. I get what you're going for. I didn't hate it simply because I thought, again, like visually, like it's cool to watch stuff get crushed. Like there's something that it's like, that's neat. Like I like watching, hydraulic presses try to like crush different things and seeing how they react. Like that's cool. Except they probably didn't actually have a hydraulic press
on YouTube when you're in a Fiat work meeting. You're not really paying attention to.
Yeah, it's like, what's going to happen to that Coke can? Like, wow, how flat is it going to get? Or like you see with depending on the density of the metal that the press is using and the density of the object, like you can use certain like tungsten and titanium balls or whatever that will like break the press itself, which is even more satisfying. But I mean, it wasn't great. It was a pretty predictable ad. But why did you hate it? I'm curious.
Okay, so I think, keep in mind this is only like a few hours old for me.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's only a day or two old.
Yeah.
As of when we're recording this, even more layers may dawn on me at some point, or I may read even more criticism of it, because that's another interesting thing that I saw it in, or I kind of consumed it in an odd way, because I had seen so many tweets dunking on it before I actually watched it, and I guess I just thought, like, there's no way. They all just seemed so extreme in their disparagement, all these tweets, that I thought they must be exaggerations, right? It can't possibly be that bad. And then I eventually did watch it. It's like, oh no, it is actually that bad. It's so bad. So, okay, but why is it bad? So I think there's more than one reason why it's bad. I'm not even sure where to start. So on the surface, it seems like they clearly didn't recognize what the alternative interpretations of this were going to be. So I agree with your description as to like, that's what they were probably going for.
And right? Crushing stuff is kind of cool,
crushing stuff is kind of cool. But they didn't, there's so many things that they seemingly nobody picked up on. Like everything they're destroying is not only a creative tool, but a physical creative tool. It's something that you manipulate in the real world and you have real control over as an artist, say. Whereas they're destroying that in order to create this basically read-only like slab of metal that this $1 trillion corporation can cut off your access to at any moment. They seemingly didn't pick up that would be, I would actually argue, a more obvious interpretation than the literal one that you gave. But then that lends itself to, so this is what I mean when there's like layers to how bad it is, that Apple is a huge, or it's like one of the biggest companies in the world. I don't really know anything about how these ads get made, but I'm sure that it was an ad agency that did it. But basically, how many people didn't sign off, didn't object? How many people had the opportunity to say what I just said, and I don't know, were just like scared shitless of their boss, or didn't want to go? Were aware of how much money had been spent on this already. I don't know what the process is of making these things, but I think that reflects even more poorly on Apple than how bad the commercial is. It's like how it even got made is worse than how bad it is. And there's probably more layers that I haven't had time to think of yet, but it's so bad. It's so bad.
That is a really interesting point, just about like kind of the like viewed through another lens, like, wow, it's kind of like dark and tragic. It's like we are literally crushing all of these physical creative tools. Like we are destroying them. Like
one of the tweets, I would just like recite all of them, but there's one of them that I think in hindsight I agreed with the most, even though I read it first. That it's a good bookend to, they use that exact expression. It's a good bookend to the 1984 one, which I'm sure I'm sure most of the audience knows. Just in terms of the, how would you put it? I forget how the tweet put it. The themes, I guess, or like the imagery that in the 1984 one, and I think it goes back to your point about they used to be the upstart and now they're the monolith, and there's no kind of, I don't know, upstarting left for full, and they've just completely reversed what Apple is representing in all of this. It would seem, and it's almost like, okay, well that chapter is over. And in a sense, we're over. It's like Apple's done now. Apple's something else. It's not Steve Jobs's anymore.
Yeah, and just in case, like, you wanted to know, like, literally the eyeballs popping out at the end, it's like you're dead. Like that's kind of that's just like, that's death. It's a surprised face and then dead. Like, I'm glad we were able to offer some color commentary over this colorful video. And you know what? I miss the old, I miss the Apple dunking days, just like dunking on Microsoft.
Like the one with the two guys.
With what's his name? Justin
I'm a Mac,
Long.
I'm a PC.
Yeah.
Yeah,
like,
they were good. Yeah.
Brilliant concept. Worked well. Stuck with people. Stuck with me to today. It's like, I'm not that fucking nerd. Like, no way.
Yeah, exactly.
Not Justin Long either, but
remember,
like,
we all remember that one.
Exactly. But yeah, well, I mean, maybe this is just maybe this is a symptom of just the, something you talk about a lot, is just like misallocation of capital. Like, I wonder how much that cost them to make. Presumably a shitload of money, because everything.
For the audience's benefit, I didn't set this up as like this capital misallocation.
But really,
it is. Well, I think that's kind of. I think this is torturing that point a little bit. This is just wasting money. It's not exactly the same thing, I don't think.
Yeah, but you could have made that same. You could have probably made a stronger impression that wasn't vilified as much by those watching it, and didn't potentially make such like a weirdly negative implied cultural statement by going back to something like really simple. Like I think a lot of brands that have done that, like I'll take for example my good old fashioned Miller Lite, my favorite perfectly balanced light beer. I'm from Wisconsin in the United States, so grew up with this stuff. But they went back to their like original design can a number of years ago, and just kept that. They'd gone to some new like fancy silvery kind of cool.
Oh yeah.
And they just decided,
destroy the logo as well. By any chance. Like, that's something that's going around.
But then they were like, a number of years ago, they're like, what if we just went back and did the really cool old original design? We don't have to hire a team for this.
All this shit.
Yeah. Like, we don't have to do anything new for this. We just go back to what it was. And people are like, oh yeah, cool. Like, this is the Miller my dad would drink. I like this. This resonates with me. And yeah, it's interesting to see, like, there seems to be this urge for companies to try and like reinvent or to change themselves without actually doing any meaningful change. Like, this is Apple trying to show that, like, look at how new this is, but like there's no reinvention here. There's no there's nothing entirely creative here. Like, it's cool that you were able to compress all this stuff down into a super thin tablet. Awesome. But like, this isn't like earth shattering. This isn't a 10x from any of their previous tablets. Like, they're all pretty darn good. I've got an older Apple tablet here, and it isn't definitely not as powerful as the new one, but like, it fucking works. I don't know. Like where do you think this like is? Again, this just like a symptom of late stage fiat, where it's like we're out of all these companies are out of all the good innovative ideas, and it's just like, well, let's just kind of cosmetically change things and pretend like we're super innovative, but without actually doing anything innovative at all.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. To be honest, it doesn't strike me as that much of a fiat thing. It might be. Maybe if I thought about it for longer, I could come up with a good.
Might have to write an article on it.
Do you know what I think it might be? Actually, I think it might be more linked to social media and, would you call it like news cycles, something like that, and just in terms of how companies feel they need to advertise. There might be something there. This is just coming to me right now. I don't have a grand theory around this or anything, but it
Not
just
yet.
the way you described the thing with Miller Lite, that got me thinking that, a lot of the same principles you would think ought to apply to Apple, probably ought to apply to any very large company with a distinctive brand that, at the end of the day, or maybe this doesn't quite work for Apple because they are a bit more kind of tech oriented, but certainly for someone like Miller Lite, where the product is basically commoditized, right? There's not like a secret sauce or anything, and their value add as a company really just is in the brand itself. You would think that protecting the brand ought to be a focus, and almost like there should be a bit of a Lindy effect. I would imagine, the longer that it's been around, the more powerful the brand becomes. Whereas it seemed, and I correct me if I'm wrong, because I only just learned this example from you now, that maybe Miller went through, or whoever owns Miller, I don't know, I'm sure there's like a multinational conglomerate parent company or something, but they maybe went through this before and then realized how bad an idea it was, that they feel pressured to constantly remake the brand just to keep up with, I don't even know, just because I kind of think it's fake in the first place, so I'm not really sure what to link it to. But shorter and shorter attention spans, let's say, their presumption, because I don't even know if this is true. I hope it's not true, but their presumption that their audience that they're advertising to is itself constantly changing and constantly looking for a new thing. Because this is finally coming full circle to where this idea came from, because the way it's presented on social media, like the doom scrolling and the algorithm and all that, makes it seem that way, when in fact it's just beer. It is the beer your dad drank, right? Like, why do you need anything more than that? Why do you need to change everything and confuse everybody?
No, I think
that's off the top of my head, that's my best idea.
No, I would agree with that. And I think that there's generally like this appetite to like that companies assume that people always want the new, like that something has to be new and be fresh, and it always has, to make a big splash, and and like, you go to the other extreme of that, which is like the Bud Light just self-immolating, but like they really were trying to push that, like really trying to lean into like, I support the current thing, versus like, what, maybe people just
said that.
Yeah,
they put that logo on the can.
That would have been a great, like, honestly really great campaign. Like Bud Light, I support the current thing, like, especially if it was a little tongue in cheek.
No,
like
what would have been amazing, actually. I'm surprised nobody thought of this. If maybe Miller Lite, I don't know, but whoever Bud Light's most obvious competitor is, had immediately come out with an "I support the current thing" campaign. That would have been hilarious. I'm disappointed that that nobody did that, as far as I'm aware.
Well, right. And I think it's because most marketing agencies, whether they be in-house or external, are not very based. I think that would be a fair generalization.
I mean, that suggests that it's just even more of an opportunity, though.
Right?
I don't know. I said a couple of answers ago, I don't know how that industry works.
Yeah. But well, I could pontificate about Miller Lite's branding and Bud Light's self-immolation all day. But I also I want to dig into a little more
Miller Lite episode.
Yeah, this
esteemed, highly knowledgeable guest.
Maybe they will
come on to ignorantly opine.
I love it, and maybe Miller Lite will sponsor another fucking Bitcoin podcast after this. That'll be when I know I've made it, when I'm just getting pallets of Miller Lite delivered as part of a sponsorship gig. That'd be just sweet. I'd like to take a quick break from Miller Lite to remind you to get your Bitcoin off exchanges. Head to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use promo code Walker for 5% off the fully open source Bitcoin only Bitbox O2 hardware wallet. Then again, get your Bitcoin off the exchanges and into your own self-custody. The Bitbox O2 is truly easy as hell to use, whether you are brand new to Bitcoin, just starting out, or you are a well-seasoned psychopath, and this is like your 12th hardware wallet. Again, it is Bitcoin only, and again, it is fully open source. You can head to their GitHub and you can verify that for yourself. There is no need to trust me. Plus, when you go to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use promo code Walker, not only do you get 5% off the Bitbox O2, but you also help support this fucking podcast. So thank you. I'll take it back a step because I like to ask this question in a very general, open-ended way, and you can take it any way you want because that is the nature of this question, which is just who are you and how did you get here today? And again, any way you want to take that, any length that you want to, I know, yeah, you can get as literal or figurative as you want with that.
I could give as stupid and annoying an answer to this as I want. Okay, I'll give a more straightforward answer, and if it's not entertaining enough, you can chastise me, and we can come back, and I can give something more out there. Who am I? So okay, here's a fun way of putting it that it is literally true, but it gives you avenues to poke. I'm a mole, or maybe even a plant from TradFi, and I've kind of fallen into Bitcoin and then just stayed. So I worked in TradFi. I worked for a big asset management firm for a very long time. It's the only adult job I've ever had, in the sense of I got it straight after I graduated from college, from undergrad, and while I was in college I had minimum wage gigs, flipping burgers and parking cars and that kind of thing. But this is real job, over the course of me being there, got more and more. I knew about Bitcoin when I joined. Actually, it just wasn't at all relevant to my job, and got more and more into it while it got closer and closer to becoming relevant to my job. And when it finally did, everything basically happened very quickly, in the sense that as soon as I had exposure to it professionally, which was many, many years after I'd had pretty significant I say exposure, I don't mean financial exposure, I mean more time dedicated to thinking about it seriously. As soon as I had that on the job, I basically realized this is way more fun than my real job. I want to do this all the time. And so I don't know, your audience may or may not actually know this, because most of what I do on Twitter is just kind of generic shit posting rather than any meaningful promotion. But about almost exactly 2 years ago, actually, I left to set up a company that it's basically just a VC firm. I mean, we have ambitions to do other more exciting financy stuff with Bitcoin, but the VC component is sort of how we pay the bills for now.
No, I love it. I like the idea of you as a plant. You're like a recovering
exactly.
TradFi holic.
You go to TradFi Anonymous.
Yeah, exactly.
Hi, I'm Alan. I was in TradFi for 7 years. Been clean for 2.
No, I love it, and I think that's you see a good amount of that in Bitcoin. Like, and I think that the number of TradFi recovering TradFi addicts will only increase. Like, that is NGU technology as well.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But I think perhaps like there's a. I'm curious. Did you see when you were still at your old firm? Did you have other colleagues who were as open to Bitcoin as you were?
Oh,
Did
yeah,
you see?
definitely. Yeah. I mean, there's quite a few things I could say there. So one is that the co-author of Bitcoin is Venice, when we turned it into a book, Sasha, he's just one of my best friends anyway. He was a groomsman of it. There you go. Yeah, yeah. He was a groomsman at my wedding. We met because we joined that job at the same time. We were part of the same intake. In 2015, so it was quite a while ago now. He's obviously always been very open to it. He's nowhere near. I guess he's just a bit more kind of private and shy than me, so he's never really found it appealing to shitpost as much as I do. I mean, he has Twitter and he sends some bangers every now and then. I do my best to retweet them, but he just doesn't really care. Like, he doesn't have any interest in trying to self promote, I guess. But yeah, I mean, he was interested in it clearly, enough to want to co-write a book. So that was good. I mean, the other point worth making, I've said this before. I'm not trying to be, secretive about it in any way either. It's just that I really like my former employer. I didn't rage quit. It wasn't like, finally I can. Well, it was a little bit of finally I can now do Bitcoin stuff, but everybody understood that they're far too big for it to make sense to do it there. So that was kind of the rationale for leaving, and I don't think anyone was really that surprised. They were just happy for me, very, very supportive. So this is a super interesting thing. I mentioned this a little bit in public before, but I think you'll enjoy diving into this. That they as a company, not so much any individuals, but their investment philosophy is very, I wouldn't say it's pro Bitcoin. It's not that strong, but it aligns very nicely with Bitcoin, which helped in a bunch of ways. I mean, I actually think it helped me appreciate Bitcoin more, to be honest. It wasn't the biggest influence on me, but it was a bit more circuitous than that, maybe, in that their investment philosophy, which I don't want to say I just swallowed it without any critical analysis on my part, but I believed in it for the most part. Like, I appreciated it. That was the lens through which I learned finance at large, both in theory and, the kind of more practically, like how the industry works. And then that lent itself to Bitcoin very nicely. So that's one component. I think just an obvious manifestation of that, though, is that at the level of individuals rather than the company as a whole, there's plenty of people who are totally open to it, which is really nice. I mean, there's no one who's anywhere near as involved as me, probably unsurprisingly. So typically they would kind of defer to me on anything more in depth. But then, there's a good cohort of people. I'm still in touch with most of them, actually, and it's quite funny because it's the whole premise, in some sense, like definitely part of our thesis, let's say at Axiom, is just that it's gonna become more and more normalized, right? It's obviously very niche now, but if we're even vaguely right, it's gonna get, but not just in price, but in terms of, I'd say, more interesting angles of like how it gets embedded in other technology, how it becomes socially normalized, and so on and so forth. But that, to the extent that's true, it has an obvious consequence in terms of what they see as investable opportunities. So every now and then, someone there will reach out just to see what I think about something because it's come across their desk for the first time.
Right.
So yeah, there's in short answer, yes, many people were interested, and it was a very very, very healthy environment to discuss these things, and helpful for me as well.
Yeah, it's good to hear. I'm sure that's probably the case at a lot of these types of firms. Certainly, maybe not a majority of them, but I'm not sure. I don't disagree, but I think it's probably rarer than you would think. And this ties together a few things I said just a moment ago, actually, in kind of an amusing way, that one of the
the parts of their, I wouldn't even say their investment philosophy. It's not so much to do with, rationale for choosing investments. If anything, it's a bit more kind of marketing oriented than that. It's like their propaganda in a way, that how they conceive of themselves, which I think is for the most part true. And it's also something, as I mentioned before, it resonated with me and influenced how I came to think about the financial industry, or the traditional financial industry. I'll keep it kind of high level for now. We can go into more detail if you want, but without those details, one way you can think about that propaganda is that they set themselves up as very opposed to like almost the entire rest of the industry, in a way that, just to be clear, has nothing whatsoever to do with Bitcoin. It's just, okay, no, sorry, that's not quite right. It's nothing explicit to do with Bitcoin, but the tenets on which it is based are shockingly aligned with Bitcoin. So it's that, I mean, this isn't official, just to be clear. This is just like kind of my recollection of it. They don't write this down anywhere, but the rest of the industry is alarmingly short-termist, right? And as their contrast is that, they're very long-term. They think over very long. They don't use the word or the expression time preference, but frankly, they may as well. They're focused on metrics that don't really matter because they're too reflexive, and hence they're ultimate. When you unwind them, they're really just pointing at speculation rather than actual investment. So in the sense of gauging the viability of the investments in ways that, if you kind of push to an extreme, almost have nothing to do with the actual company that you're talking about. It's like just the price. And actually now I'm thinking, I've never made exactly this point before, but now I'm thinking about it. A lot of these criticisms, or a lot of what is being criticized, kind of you'd have to caricature it a little bit, but it would certainly apply to shitcoins as well. Like the entire the entire attitude and kind of almost disgust and resentment is very similar to, I think also rubbed off on me and probably made it easier for me to cut through the noise there and in X Bitcoin crypto, to be clear, and realize that the people who are talking about this stuff don't actually care. Like, you can tease out from the way they're talking about it, they don't care about the underlying alleged cause of this value, right? It's like a pump and dump or whatever. It changes from one circumstance to the next. But anyway, sorry, what made me think of all of this is that the fact that they set themselves up that way, and I jokingly refer to it as propaganda. I guess culture would be maybe like a nicer way of putting it. That's probably what they call it. First of all, I know for sure is quite unusual, but also I think completely coincidentally, because obviously none of this is about Bitcoin, rubbed off on me in a very helpful way, given the path I've now gone down. But I really can't imagine being the case, or anything like it being the case at that many other institutions, at least of comparable size, because it's quite a big company. It's not huge, but it's up there in terms of the amount of assets that they manage, like in dollar terms. So I don't think that many people will have had a similar experience. I would imagine, and actually I've heard this from quite a few people. I wouldn't like dox anybody on the show, but quite a few people have reached out to me over the years, basically saying, who also work in TradFi, and are just like, I just hate it. Like, everyone's, well, they probably wouldn't say everyone's an idiot, but more along the lines of the culture is so contrary to what they have now come to value because of Bitcoin.
Is that really it seems that what you're kind of picking at there is a question of ultimately morality in many ways. Is that fair to say? Because when you talk about things like short-term, like really short-term true speculation, now we can debate whether, everything is speculation in some way, right? If you're trying to pursue a profit in an uncertain environment, there's a certain amount of speculation involved in everything. But when we're talking about just like people who are knowingly promoting, propagating, creating various vehicles, whether this is in the TradFi world or the shitcoin world, that, yeah, as you said, you can tell by the way that they talk about them that they don't actually believe their own bullshit. They're saying what they're saying what they think you need to hear. But you also, if you are mildly intelligent, know that they're kind of full of shit, but you're like, well, I'm going to kind of go along with this because I know that I'm going to at least make some money off of this, because the next round of people that comes along, they're going to have no idea. Like I'm, there's still dumb money that I can dump this on, like versus this kind of longer term thinking. I'm not just trying to flip things. I'm not just trying to figure out what's the next scheme or the next idea that I can use to make a quick buck and then turn that into something else. I'm trying to think about the long haul and what are actually productive, valuable, meaningful investments. Like, to me, a lot of that comes back to, and maybe morality is too general of a term to use, but that kind of seems to be what it hints at. And maybe that seems too like, oh, we're more moral in our investing. But I think that there's something there. I mean, is that kind of the sense that you have, or is it just purely from a pragmatism standpoint?
Not exactly, but I think there's a lot of really good material here to draw out. So one thing that is quite funny, I'll just mention this in passing, is that, again, back to the propaganda around the firm, they did enjoy, somewhat tongue in cheek, playing this up in the sense that, what we're doing is actually good. I don't think they'd ever go as far as say, oh, everyone else is bad, but it's implied, right?
Right,
So
right.
That is kind of funny. I think it's actually it's a little bit more complicated than just whether or not it's good, or contrasting good and bad, ethically good and bad approaches. For one reason that's actually quite important, even before getting into my explanation of, like, my fuller explanation of it. So if you were to think that, I know you're not putting this forward, but just, hypothetically, probably some people do think this, actually, that
we can pretend that I put it forward. Yeah.
If you were to think that your choice as to how you're going to invest is, there's a single dimension of, is this good or is this bad? I don't think, I'm struggling to think how exactly to articulate this. It's very risky lens to take right from the start, because even if you don't mean it, I think it quite strongly suggests, and certainly will be interpreted by others as suggesting, that the good or bad dimension, you're choosing to value that more than the good or bad as an investment, like financially rewarding, right, or not. So you're deliberately making not bad investments, but relatively worse investments, because you're opting for, you have like an ethical filter, say, something like that. So, which I don't think is relevant at all to this. I think it's, you desperately want to avoid that trap. And I won't go too far down this particular rabbit hole, but you could also imagine how that very easily leads to ESG as well, because that's
right,
a bit more blatantly, that is what they're putting forward, except they're then going the other way, where they are in fact making that distinction, but then they claim they're not. And it, in my opinion, just becomes fraud quite quickly. But I'll leave that for now. We can go back to whining about ESG if you like. Yeah. What I think is more important than just on the face of it, is this good or bad, is incentives. I think that's the cleanest way of capturing it. So I do agree that the approach that I described, and that is obviously very nicely aligned with Bitcoin, is more ethically good. I don't think the reason the majority doesn't do it is that they are ethically bad. It's that the incentives in the industry are such that even if they are ethically good, whether as people or they're trying to be ethically good in their process, whatever that even really means, the incentives they face are such that it's not impossible to, take this approach, but it's very, very difficult, and hence it doesn't happen very often at all. And so I think that's a far more interesting place to kind of chip away at intellectually, in terms of wondering, why do we get the outcomes that we do? And I'll I'll stop here because I'm sure you'll find this funny anyway, but it'll potentially open up many, many more rabbit holes, so you can choose which one you want to go down. But that is very fiat, right? That I have no qualms whatsoever about, before it was like Apple and Miller and stuff. I was a bit like, I don't know if that's exactly fiat. Like, this is fiat. This is the most fiat thing that we have talked about so far, and probably that I've ever, ranted about, because I ran about this particular topic quite a bit. A lot of TradFi is very, very fiat, but in particular, this point about what are the incentives as to how you ought to deploy capital.
And maybe, it's a this is a safe space for rants. So never feel that you cannot continue or explore a certain ranting tangent. But maybe this is a good place to just like as a primer for folks who are either not, perhaps are fairly new to Bitcoin and maybe kind of new to the rabbit hole of tangential rabbit hole of Austrian economics and, what many would call like real economics versus this kind of Keynesian fiat economics. Maybe it's a good idea to just, I would love in your own words, explain it to me like I'm Elizabeth Warren, for example. This is also my new ELI 5. It's just like explain it like I'm Elizabeth Warren, because I think it teases out some nice responses. But like, what is capital and what is capitalism? It's a heavy one. I know.
Can I take a break to go and think about it? So, okay. I have a sneaky answer.
I like sneaky.
Which is to tell people to go read something. So first of all, it's a totally unfair question. Like, this is really mean.
I know.
In this way. One of the more recent things that I have written, actually, it might be the most recent thing I've written now that I think about it, because everything else I've just helped edit. But for Axiom, since Axiom has started putting out material, is an essay called Capital in the 21st Century. So people can go find that if they're interested. You don't have to go read it, but it is probably the best answer to this. And it's not too long. I think it's maybe like 5-6 pages, something like that.
It's like short. It's short for you. I think.
Now that I've said that, now I've committed to it. But it starts off with exploring exactly this question, and then linking it to, having established what I think is a reasonable answer, like a good working answer, linking it to money, and then linking it to Bitcoin. And so I'll try to give a summary of that argument in answer to your question. So I think the nicest way that I have come across to describe capital was provided by an economist called Hernando de Soto, who interestingly is not an Austrian. I think he'd probably call himself like a neoclassical economist. But he wrote a book which I highly, highly recommend. It's probably one of the economics books I recommend the most. It's probably one of the only like explicitly non-Austrian ones. The book's called The Mystery of Capital, which is where I got this definition, I guess. It's kind of more of it's not really very rigorous. It's more almost romantic in a way. It's kind of an image. Like this is exactly what I say at the start of the essay. But he refers to capital as economic potential energy, which I really, really like as an image. I think it obviously it's not, I mentioned saying it's not rigorous at all. It doesn't really, I think you do have to have a little bit of understanding already to apply this. But it lends itself very nicely to more involved thoughts about, things like capital misallocation. And again, exactly as I do in the essay, how it then links to money and so on. But to tease it out a little bit further, it's time that you have decided to put into producing rather than consuming, but which you have, the product of which has not itself been fully consumed yet. So it's like you're storing up the time in potential to then be. There's a couple of things I like about it. Is it partly the how it forces you to think about time. It's a very Austrian thing, right? Also, I think if you push it a bit further, how it forces you to think about human action and the role of acting minds, because it's not just that, oh, it gets stored up and then it starts like decaying or something. I mean, I know this is all a metaphor anyway, but that's not part of how you're supposed to understand the metaphor. Is that you store it up such that you can then purposefully release it when you choose in the future. And so, yeah, I really like that. I don't know if that really answers the question at all.
No, it does, and I think that's actually
people to use it.
I think that that's a useful lens, and I know that people get really hung up sometimes on like even describe it like when somebody like Saylor says something like Bitcoin is digital energy, and people are like, well, no, it's not, and it's like, yes, correct, it's not. This is a lens through which to think it, because none of us really fucking understands every single aspect of Bitcoin and what it is and what it can be, and at the same time we are mildly intelligent apes, and we need a way to figure out a lens through which to look at the world, which is useful for us to kind of paint a picture, and people learn and understand things in different ways. And so I think these metaphors like is capital just potential energy, literally, like Allen, and it's like, well, no, but this is a way to think about it, right? Yeah. So I think that is useful. And to speak to the time component, which is a really necessary piece here, I think that's also, that obviously perfectly bleeds into, okay, well, if you are saving this potential energy, this time that can be basically deployed at a later stage, well, you want the time decay to be as minimal as possible, or zero. Ideally, you'd want that. Ideally, you'd want it to be negative, right? You'd want it to grow, to have the ability to purchase more time in this way with that potential energy in the future. And that's why fiat is such a destructive tool, because it has this massive time decay function, which is saying that the longer you are holding on to that potential energy, the more it decays, the less power it has when you go to deploy it in the future. And
actually, no, I tweak that slightly just to emphasize the human component. The less ability you have to wield it the way you want to.
Okay, because that's interesting, because that can potentially bleed into a couple other effects of just like, one can even think of the custody aspect of fiat, and the fact that you can't self-custody fiat unless it's literally under your mattress. Like you can't digitally self-custody fiat. It's not possible. It's always controlled by someone else.
I don't mean to move too far away from the capital point, but this seems like a natural enough segue that one of my favorite tricks for, I wouldn't say orange pilling people, like no one's convinced just by having this pointed out, but confusing normies, let's say, like you hope that you say this and then 5 years later they do actually get orange pilled, and this was the start of it. But really drilling down on what fiat money even is, because most people have no idea. And I think part of the problem is that, or not part of the problem, part of the issue that you then untangle when you do this, like if you have this conversation with people, is that what I mean in answer to that, I think, is at kind of a more philosophical level than they've probably ever thought about it. So my answer is, it's a commercial bank liability. That's what fiat money is. And it's purely conceptual. It has no physical existence. To some extent, it's like an entry in a ledger, but even that is like, the actual ledger is digital, so it's not super helpful. But so it's a bit kind of conceptual. It's a bit abstract. In part, the problem, I think, is that people don't tend to think about really anything that way. Never mind money. So that's a bit of a leap to like nudge them in this like, oh, but what is it really kind of thing. But once they get over that, once they sort of accept the framing I'm going for, it's really interesting just sort of seeing them realize that they've never thought about this, that they didn't actually have any idea. And obviously there's loads of great like directions you can go in. There's loads of cool ways you can tease that out. Like, you have, this was the point that you made that made me think of it. You don't actually have any control, right? You think you do, but it's kind of even weirder than that though. Cause like, it's not even really equivalent, I don't think, to, I don't know, like a custodial Lightning wallet or something, or just like, Bitcoin on Coinbase. It's not like they have control, not you. You actually, when you insist on being as philosophical as possible, you're like, there isn't even a thing to control. It's not that they don't have control. It's that it like barely exists. Like, it's just a promise from them, you know?
No, it's so interesting, and maybe this is we're just going to topic hop here today because you say things and they make me think of other things, and again, this is an open space for rants. This makes me think of all of I notice MMT has come up very much in the public discourse of late, because Stephanie Kelton is released her new movie, and you can buy it for $12.99 on various platforms, and so that video that was circulating that went super viral. There was a clip from the movie.
You have to pull that up and show it.
I've got. Yeah, you're right. If I'm going to show one, but I think, and while I'm pulling this up, maybe what I would ask you is, like MMTers and Bitcoiners in a way, kind of have like we agree up to a point.
Yeah.
Except,
funny, isn't it?
It is. Except Bitcoiners look at it as like this absurd thing. Like, well, why do we pay taxes? We can just print money. And MMTers are like, exactly, just print the money. Like really earnest. And then Bitcoiners, it's like, oh Jesus, you guys are being serious here. Can you talk about how you like? Because MMT seems like the pinnacle of fiat. Like it's just finally saying out loud all of the things that have been true.
Yeah.
But instead of saying like, look at how terrible this is, they're like, look at how wonderful this is for issuers of the currency. Can you?
I mean, I don't think I can put it much better than that. That's more or less exactly what I would have said, that the reason we agree is because they give a more or less accurate description of how fiat actually works, which no other mainstream school of economics dares to do, I guess. And again, I was saying before, I don't really know anything about advertising. I don't really know anything about academic economics in terms of the politics of it. I mean, I know the how stupid the material is, but I don't know how it works on a more of a social level. But I would assume that the reason it ends up having to be MMTers who do this is probably a combination of most people just don't know. Like they've just genuinely never thought about it. They probably just assume some kind of vague things about money that they think are well defined, but they've never been pressed on them and realized that they don't actually make any sense. And then maybe there are a few who do know but don't dare talk about it because they've kind of realized how bad it is. Whereas the MMTers give an accurate description. So Bitcoiners celebrate that. They're like, oh my God, finally someone's actually saying it the way it is, and without all these nonsensical contortions. But then, you're right. At the end of that description, once it becomes normative, they're like, and this is great. And you're like, no. Did you even hear your own description? What are you talking about?
Oh wait, okay. So I've got this pulled up now.
Oh yeah, the clip,
because this is. I mean, it's really amazing. Like, I do want to see this doc. Maybe I'll even give Stephanie Kelton $12.99 for it. Okay, here we go.
The U.S. government can't go bankrupt because we can print our own money.
It obviously begs the question, why exactly are we borrowing in a currency that we print ourselves? I'm waiting for someone to stand up and say, why do we borrow our own currency in the first place?
Like you said, they print the dollar. So why does the government even borrow?
Well, again, some of this stuff gets, some of the language that some of the language and concepts are just confusing. I mean, the government definitely prints money, and it definitely lends that money, which is why the government definitely prints money, and then it lends that money by selling bonds. Is that what they do? They sell bonds. Yeah, they sell bonds, right? Because they sell bonds and people buy the bonds and lend them the money. Yeah. So a lot of times, at least to my ear with MMT, the language and the concepts can be kind of unnecessarily confusing, but there is no question that the government prints money and then it uses that money to I guess I can't really talk. I don't get it. I don't know what they're talking about. Like, because it's like the government clearly prints money. It does it all the time, and it clearly borrows. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this debt and deficit conversation. So I don't think there's anything confusing there.
Nothing confusing there, except this guy is clearly so confused. Like that's the wild thing about this is it's like this guy is literally like Biden's, like one of his his chief economic advisor.
Yeah, something like that.
Like this is just
I think
insane.
it's said in the caption. People
Yeah.
Go back 10 seconds.
Yeah, and so I mean, this is the wild thing here. It's like I saw some people being like some Bitcoiners being like, just so you know, this is an MMT person sharing this video. Like we shouldn't be. If you're agreeing, it's like no. It is good that this this is a good thing this documentary is coming out because it sheds light on the absurdity of all this and how even the people in charge of it clearly don't. I mean, that guy, I don't know. He has no business being having economic or advisor anywhere in his title, for one thing, and for another, it's just like the absurdity of it. Like I don't know, have you read The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton?
No.
I have only.
Honestly, I feel like I've imbibed enough of this from Twitter. I don't need to waste any, time. We know time is scarce.
Yeah, I have not read her book, but I have read many quotes from it. I've also asked ChatGPT to summarize it in various ways, and to write arguments from an MMT perspective so that I can better understand that thought process. But like one of their big things is public sector deficit equals private sector surplus. So, and their whole thing is it's this. I mean, it all comes down to hubris, really, because they're like, well, okay, yes, deficits can be good or bad. And she has this one quote in this TED talk she gave. She's like, a 6 can become a 9 when viewed from a different angle. And I'm like, are you making a 69 joke? But like, it's like, okay, sure, but a 6 is still a 6 and a 9 is still not. But anyway, okay, fine, you can have your little metaphor. But it's this insane hubris, in my opinion, that basically says, well, yes, the government prints money, and for issuers of the currency, again, very clear there, you need to be, the United States or the United Kingdom or another currency issuer for this to work. You don't need to tax more. You just print money to fund whatever you want. And as long as we put it into the right stuff, then it won't be inflationary. We just have to pick the right things to invest the money in. And this comes down to the hubris of central planners. And at a deeper level, I think just like central planning and its failure and a misunderstanding of subjective value and the fact that all value is subjective. And this idea that, well, yeah, this group of a few economists and politicians in a back room can certainly figure out how to perfectly allocate the resources to make the economy just run, perfect. And like, it's just on its head absurd and dripping in hubris. But I mean, I don't know. Do you think this comes down to just like, at this point, they're just looking for reasons to justify behavior that already exists in the system? Or do these people genuinely think like, no, this is the answer. We're smart enough. We can figure it out. Like, we'll just allocate the capital correctly that we just printed out of thin air, and that'll create more value. I don't know.
I mean, I think this ties with the way you introduced the whole topic in kind of an amusing way, that it is interesting that their description is purely the description is more or less right without whether it's a good idea or not. Right. But the description of how the process of money creation works, let's say, certainly not what the consequences are for capital misallocation, right, and inflation, and
ding ding ding. You said capital misallocation.
Yeah. I have to. I can't.
You have to.
I can't go on a podcast and not say that. What I think is really funny though is that how can I even put this? Because again, there is a bit of a like I'm just guessing at what the politics of this are in terms of the social component of these people as academics, but it does strike me as quite amusing that the fact their description is correct and that nobody, I mean, other than Bitcoiners who may as well not exist as far as they're concerned, there certainly isn't any presence within academic economics for them to compete with. The fact their description is the only correct one, but that basically what it is correctly describing is that the monetary system has been more or less communist since at least 1971. Obviously we don't need to go through the whole history here, but you could pick other dates at which it was kind of nudging in that direction, right? It's almost like their argument is, okay, you know, we have now finally correctly identified how this communist monetary system works. So can we please just be communist? Like, why are we still arguing about this? I think they obviously can't phrase it that way. Like, they never get away with that. But I think that is the gist of their argument, which is pretty funny. Which I appreciate. Like you said before, right? Like, people should watch this. You shouldn't try to, not that any, you know, Bitcoin Twitter can get it censored or anything, but you shouldn't discourage people from just letting them talk, right? Just listen to how insane they sound when they talk.
No, I have another question for you. Has real capitalism ever been tried? We always, you know, all the commies always say, well, real communism's never been tried. Has real capitalism ever been tried?
Yeah, I think so. But I kind of want to just say that I want to reject the question more than
Fair
I
enough.
can go back to like attempting to answer it honestly. The reason I kind of don't want to at all, though, is that this is probably one of my biggest bugbears with, certainly not within Bitcoin, to be clear, but just like wider public discourse, if you want to call it that. That almost everybody seems to mean something different by capitalism. Like even a lot of people who allegedly support it, when they use the word, they're describing something that I wouldn't call it that. But then everyone has their own thing. I think more so on the side of people who are really just statists, and they kind of, it's a bit like, you know, like how if you don't like something more politically, you just call it fascist, especially if you're more kind of lefty. You just call everything fascist. And it doesn't matter whether it is or not, or what it is in particular. It's really more of a slur. It's like they're painting it as untouchable, and therefore people don't even need to think about it at all. I think a lot of statists, again, I don't really feel the need to be much more precise than that, do something, or you know, Keynesians, let's say, do that with capitalism. And it's almost like it stays in their own mind what they even mean by it. So that's my non-answer. I just reject the question because it's too confusing. It'll lead people down completely unhelpful paths.
So you defined earlier for us capital, but what is your, like, ignoring everyone else's misconceptions about what capitalism is? How do you define it? When you use the word, what do you mean by it?
Well, so I actually don't think I use the word capitalism very often.
Okay.
Ever. So I'm going to keep giving you annoying, evasive.
No.
Obviously, use the word capital all the time. But I think the problem with it, right, to tie a few of these things together, the reason I don't use it, the reason other people use it confusingly, I think, or part of the reason that seems to be the case, is that, to my mind, capital is just a pretty straightforward. Well, no, sorry, it's not straightforward at all. It's a complicated concept, but it's an economic concept. When you tease it out and when you apply it in the context of some other problem, maybe it takes on political components or legal component or whatever. Like it obviously bleeds into other fields. But the way the word capitalism tends to be used is almost never with reference to economics, as far as I can tell, right? People will, we've already done it on this show, right? You'll talk about like neoclassical economics or Keynesian or Austrian or modern monetary theory or whatever, right? No one says capitalism as if it's a school of economics, even though capital is an economic concept. And so I think that confusion, they use it predominantly politically, as far as I can tell. But then, you know, even that, I'm not sure if that's entirely true, because the more confusing usages of it that then rile me up are maybe in part political, but they kind of mean something cultural, or they kind of mean something legal. And the fact that this is why I object to it, and kind of somewhat jokingly just gave you a complete non-answer that
you're very evasive.
I don't want to give you a definition because I'm not sure what anyone else means by it either. Like I'm not sure why I would even want to define it. So there you go. That's as unhelpful as I can possibly be.
I appreciate.
What even are words, man?
What do words even exist, man? Yeah. Well, okay. Perhaps a different way of framing this, just because you touched on statism in general. Do you have an opinion of what the proper role of the state is in the modern era?
Yeah, kind of. This is interesting. I started talking about this with a couple of people just in a I think it was a Twitter group actually, just the other day. So this is kind of fresh, but in this somewhat jokey context of like, I'm going to write a book on this in 30 years or something. So give me your ideas now,
Yeah.
and then I'll steal them and not credit you. I think this is very loose, but this isn't like an answer really. Again, it's more helpful
Another
than my previous
non-answer.
answer, but it's more just like a train of thought.
Yeah.
That I think when most people approach this, and in particular, people who I would be inclined to agree with, certainly, not that they're Bitcoiners necessarily, but maybe more like they might be coincidentally Bitcoiners, but in terms of the way they're framing their answer, they're, anarcho-capitalists, say, or libertarians, or there's a bunch of ways you could describe yourself if you're vaguely in that camp, which I probably would as well, and I probably agree with most of what they say. But I think a lot of arguments from that point of view suffer from a pretty serious is-ought problem, in that I agree with them ethically, but that doesn't necessarily translate to reality in any helpful way. So you can say state, the role of the state is either ought to be, you'd be like, I think it's called minarchism, right? You could be a minarchist where it's basically just to, it's police and courts, essentially. It's like, it's enforcing contracts. That's the role. Or just that there's no role, right? Even that can be done privately. And then obviously there's a spectrum of like what you're tacking onto it after that. And then communism, I suppose, is completely the other end. But when you're all of those answers, at least in terms of the way I phrased the original question, I think are really about ethics, in that you're framing the state as an actor. But ultimately, there is no state. There's just other people, right? So what you're really saying, you're communicating it in a more helpful way to aid the obviously political discussion. But what you're really saying is like, how ought individuals behave? It's a question about ethics. And sure, you can come up with your own ethical theory, but that doesn't mean anyone will behave that way. So this is like the wedge into what I want my book to be about when I write it in 30 years. That you should, there's like a weird reflexivity here, obviously, because that's a normative claim, but you should have an ethical theory and try to live according to it. And I mean, again, I would probably argue for something at least minarchist, if not just, you should never be violent, right? You should adopt the non-aggression principle. That's fine. But your expectations of others' behavior should be realistic. So to qualify that in like a really clean way, your own behavior should adhere to this ethical standard, but you should not necessarily assume other people's will. You should assume that they will behave according to whatever their incentives are. And so that's kind of what I think is super interesting to drive at. That I also think a lot of people who, maybe sentimentally, I guess, are very much in my camp, but I do honestly think they shy away from this, and a lot of their argumentation just collapses into like, well, that's wrong, right? Like, these people are bad, whatever, which is just like, okay, cool. Like they're still going to do it. Whatever the thing is that you disapprove of, like, you're not actually stopping them doing that. And then also you, if you really push people in this, you can also get into this weird, like, they feel like they're in a sort of I don't know if a contradiction or paradox is exactly the way of putting it, where you're kind of backed into saying that, well, because it's whatever the behavior is, somebody is so bad, somebody needs to stop it. But then you're basically just describing the state, and you're like, okay, no, but it's not the state, it's somebody else.
Right.
You kind of end up going around in circles like that. So again, this is like a complete non-answer. Sorry, I'm just like thinking out loud. But
I love thinking
I
out
think
loud.
the way that you resolve this, though, or the way that you should at least attempt to resolve it, is to focus on culture. I think this is interesting, right? This is like an actual, at least attempt at an answer that's vaguely original. I think the only way you can police every component of this effectively is not by one-upping the violence with, even more scary violence, and then eventually you end up in a place where it's like, well, okay, you've just recreated the state. You didn't want to call it the state, but you are functionally the state. The only way that I think you can effectively police that and reach a kind of almost equilibrium of who's happy with what credible threats of violence that incentivize, what accords with your ethical theory, is not resorting to ever more escalating violence, in pursuit of ultimate victory and the monopoly, but rather shame, basically, or other more socially enforced means of punishment and reward. So that's where I kind of land on this, that's actually more important. It's a very, very pretentious way of describing politics as downstream of culture. But not just describing it, but encouraging you to take it very, very seriously. Because if you have, if you put the requisite time and energy into creating a culture that self-enforces ethics, you don't need violence in the first place, and you can escape that loop, in theory, at least. That's my hot take.
No, I think that's an important point for people to grasp, that politics is downstream of culture. And maybe I can ask, to bring this back to Bitcoin, do you think that the incentives around Bitcoin are such that it has the ability to actually influence, like technology influencing culture, influencing politics, because it's able to change that incentive structure and takes away the ability for the monopoly on violence to be effective, basically? Is that a fair statement?
I think so. Yeah, I'm not sure I'd even add anything to that. At least nothing
All
original
right.
that your audience wouldn't have heard 1,000 times. I mean, it's a sovereign individual thesis, basically.
Yeah.
Right? It's not my thesis. It's that not just Bitcoin, but Bitcoin's probably the best example, maybe ever, of something that fits this. But a technology that shifts the balance of returns to violence, anything that fits that. I mean, I think you could talk about things like various other applications of cryptography maybe do the same thing. Not to say that Bitcoin's like a subset of that strictly or anything, but the point I'm making is more, it's not just Bitcoin that fulfills this, but I think Bitcoin that's a good way of putting why a lot of people are as excited about it as they are, that they recognize that I saw somebody say more or less, I won't get the quote exactly right, but more or less this on Twitter, addressing a lot of these same points, that Bitcoin is basically what allows libertarians to stop LARPing, right? Like this might actually work rather than just, it was back to my, somewhat facetious previous answer of like, oh no, but that's wrong. Like, okay, great. So what? Are you going to do anything about it? No.
Honestly, it's a hilarious and a great point. And it's interesting to just think about, like, in general, you see so much nihilism and pessimism throughout so much of the world. And then you see folks like, you were talking earlier about being at Cheat Code and just hanging out with plebs, and you see so much hope and optimism amongst people from a truly diverse set of backgrounds, and like actually diverse, not contrived, diversity. And you see all of this just kind of unbridled optimism, and realism too, and acknowledgement of the fact that, like things are pretty fucked up in a lot of ways, but finally there's a glimmer of hope. There's a glimmer of like, this is something that might actually have a chance at changing things. So as you said, we can stop LARPing as libertarians. Like this is something that actually makes sense and has a chance at working, and also happens to appeal to people who are not just self-identified as libertarians, but who identify as progressives or conservatives or whatever. And that's like the beauty of it, that it completely brings so many ideologies into the fold, because everybody can interpret it through their own lens. But the incentives are structured as such that it works. Like it works because it works for people, and it allows them to work in their own self-interest and to apply it to their own ideology in such a way that it can, in their minds, further that ideology. And I think that that's kind of a really unique thing. I'm curious, would you consider yourself an optimistic person, an optimistic realist, perhaps?
I think so. Yeah. If anything, I probably lean into that for comic effect a lot of the time. I try to be mindful of where my somewhat ridiculous Twitter persona ends and reality begins, but it's fuzzy.
Yeah. What do you say, like, what do you say to the nihilists out there, or to the pessimists, to the people who are like, it's just going to keep getting worse and worse and worse, there's no bright spot on the horizon? Like, is this like Bitcoin fixes this? Or is that a bridge too far for too many people, and there's a different approach that you take? How do you address nihilism that you see?
I mean, yeah, I really like Bitcoin fixes this as a meme, but only when applied appropriately. I think it can definitely be unhelpful if you're not mindful of the context in which you're bringing it up. I think basically the person you're saying it to needs to already understand quite a lot of what you would like them to understand. It's not going to convince anyone who is genuinely nihilistic, right? Your question though is, what would I say to someone who's genuinely nihilistic? I'm not sure that I'd even link that to Bitcoin so much. I can make what's maybe kind of an interesting point here just about how I think about all of this, to be honest. Kind of what, when we get like unhelpfully, I don't know, deep or almost hippie-ish or something, but like what motivates me in the first place, and what I assume motivates other people to some extent. That I try quite hard to stay cognizant of Bitcoin being a tool, as in being a means to an end rather than an end in itself. And I think that can be, for me at least, it can be quite hard. Again, just going back to my ridiculous Twitter persona and trying to remember where that ends, like where reality actually begins, because you do have to play that up, I think. Well, I mean, no one has to do anything, but it's fun to play that up in a more Twitter centric context, or even in like going on Bitcoin podcasts, being at Bitcoin conferences. Obviously, that's what people want to focus on. It's an amazing shelling point for talking about these ideas at all. But I think it's healthy, and I guess I just encourage other people to, or at least to try it if they haven't considered this perspective, that it's very much not an end in itself. And if anything, I feel like that probably nobody does take that too seriously, but for the sake of argument, if you were to, that would be quite nihilistic, I think. Like, or it would lead you to quite a nihilistic place, because it's almost like, well, okay, then what do you do? Like, why did you bother doing any of this, really? So where I'm going with this in terms of how I'd address someone who's genuinely nihilistic, I guess probably first and foremost, I wouldn't assume that I have the skill, I guess, I don't know, or ability to reach absolutely anybody in that position, and like I have some kind of silver bullet that's gonna work for them. But to the extent I was, making any effort, probably just encouraging them that there are these tools. Like maybe they're not as aware as they could be, as they should be, that it's not that they're wrong, that things are really, really bad, because I do kind of agree with that. And if you contextualize it appropriately, it's that yes, things are bad, but you don't need to. There's nothing that necessarily follows about what you should do or what your attitude should be. And hence, again, I think this is the way you set up the question, right? That if they don't know about Bitcoin, maybe they should look into it for that reason, that this could be a tool that will, not change your assessment of how, if anything, will probably make your assessment even worse once you actually grasp it to begin with. But will give you a real reason to be hopeful, rather than, well, presumably they, given the way you set it up, presumably they have none, or maybe they're kind of, what would be the best way of putting it? There's a word
malaise
escaping me. I'm just blanking on. Maybe they become cynical by, bad or cheap explanations as to why they ought not be nihilistic, and they're that's pushed them even deeper. So yeah, maybe that would chip away at the margin.
I like that. And now this is a slight departure, but still on the topic of Bitcoin. But getting more into your Twitter personality or your Nostr personality. What is the dumbest debate in Bitcoin right now? What is the dumbest one?
I don't know, because honestly, nothing's even really coming to mind for me, because for one thing, I've muted a lot of words on Twitter. So I maybe missed some of the dumber ones. I muted a lot of people. I muted a lot of words. I honestly tend to get involved in deliberately really silly debates and issues, just because I find that, and like that's kind of what, just in case anyone in the audience doesn't know, that is kind of my Twitter. At least this is what I try to make my Twitter. You can tell me if it actually is coming off in some completely different way, but what I try to have my Twitter personality to be is just very silly and trolly, and but like well intentioned.
You identify as a layer 2 on Twitter,
right? Like relentlessly lighthearted about everything. Yeah. So the kind of things that I get involved. I basically actually, to be more specific about my Twitter MO, I find completely serious debates and then just reply guy with nonsense. That's mostly how I go about it.
It's a good strategy, and I always get a chuckle from both your Twitter and your Nostr. But there's somehow there's more humorous reactions to your trolling on Twitter, I think, still, probably just because it's more people there. I mean, you had some great ones. I like the way you think about things, and again, trying to like just to dissect them, because it's very easy to get. We're all subject to knee-jerk reactions, right? Like when it comes to like the ordinals and inscriptions debate versus like, oh, we should filter all this out and all these things, and like, is all of this a scam, and does any of this have any value? And you had one tweet that's basically like about like, I think it was like ordinals are retarded, but like but that doesn't mean that you have to enhance that with caveats that proving that you are also retarded.
Ordinals is retarded, like, quote, ordinals is retarded, or ordinals are retarded, is like, it's perfectly sufficient as a criticism.
Yeah, and I like that approach to it, and it's I think it makes people step back and think a little bit, and like with a lot of these debates, I think that many of us, like myself included, from a technical standpoint, we're not always equipped to discuss them from a technical standpoint, but many people seem to try to. But it's like it's okay for you to not have a super deep, nuanced opinion on everything to anyone listening. Like you don't have to, like it is sometimes, as you said, like the simplistic definition of something, like it's perfectly acceptable just to say that and to leave it be that. Like, and the more you try to explain your position,
I can go into that one in a bit more detail. I don't want to pick on like, people can go and find the thread. Like, I have people in mind, obviously, but it doesn't feel appropriate to just throw them under the bus.
Sure.
The reason the way I came up with that was basically just noticing a lot of really stupid, and in some cases, to your point, quite technically stupid, in my opinion, arguments against ordinals or inscriptions, I guess, to be more specific. Actually, no, sorry. A lot of it was like ordinal theory and the whole rare sat thing with the halving. In my mind, making really not just bad or not like, you know, controversial or whatever, but like wrong and or meaningless, like so wrong it's not even wrong anymore arguments. I mean, probably against anything, but in particular this, because I do think ordinals are retarded, right? But making even more retarded arguments against them damages the credibility of the people who've made good arguments against them, because people will see that, and rightly or wrongly, this is like an is-ought thing, is right. This will happen whether you want it to or not. People will see your stupid arguments, recognize that they're stupid, and think all arguments in that vein or making that point are stupid. And so that's where this came from. That because I thought at least I'd identified a bunch of really stupid arguments that were undermining. I wouldn't say mine, like I don't feel particularly strongly about it, but I know people who do, who I take seriously, and who have put out very thorough, well considered, well argued arguments that I thought were making them look comparatively stupid, which is a bad thing. So that's where that came from.
Well, right, and I always find it funny, like perhaps maybe this was one of your tweets, or maybe I didn't even read it a tweet. Maybe it was something I constructed after the fact. But like, you know, you remember like Animal Farm, you know, like all animals are equal, some are more equal than others. It's like all subjective value is equal, but some subjective value is more equal than others. Like that's how I see it.
I remember the one that I think you got this from. I didn't say exactly that, but it was the Mad Men meme template where Don Draper's like, he's pitching something, right? And I'd filled it out with something like radical subjective value.
Yes.
But for the things I value.
Yes. That is exactly what I was thinking of there. And it made me think of Animal Farm and just that quote, because it's like, okay, well, you can't have it both ways. Either all value is subjective or, you know, like that's kind of like the basis for a lot of this, unless you're LARPing about that. Mm-hmm. But you know, hey, to each their own. I guess you can choose to subjectively value which subjective value is more subjectively valuable to you, and which other people should or should not find subjectively valuable. That's a lot of subjective value. You know, last. Right. Maybe one more thing, because I want to be conscious of your time here. What do you think of the idea of intrinsic value? And can you speak to the perhaps absurdity of the argument that, like, whenever you hear, like, and I saw this pop up recently, some video clip I saw, like, Bitcoin has no intrinsic value. It's like, oh my God, I thought we were past this. Like, what does that, when somebody says that, like, what does that say to you, I guess, about that person or the way that they're thinking about,
I mean, it's hopeless, probably. It's like, where do you even start with that? They're like 5 years away. 10, I mean, maybe never. Maybe they will never ever be orange pilled, because they're just too far gone.
It's sad, but
I'll give a bit of it. That's like obviously the glass half empty. The glass half full on that is worth considering as well, given you don't necessarily know why the person has said that. It would probably be something like they don't actually believe that. Like they've never thought about whether it even makes any sense or not, and hence maybe can be reached by, at least to start with, teasing apart whether intrinsic value does make any sense, which obviously we think it doesn't. They're saying it. It's like a meme for them, right? They're saying it because they've heard other people say it. It's like a thing allegedly smart people have said in circumstances that seem similar to this one, and like, this is the thing you say, so they said it, and that's preferable. I mean, it sounds maybe even more stupid, but it's like there's more promise at the same time. It's like stupid in a resolvable way.
Like, they can be deprogrammed with the right meme. If they were programmed with the right meme, they can also be deprogrammed by that same mimetic action, basically. Yeah,
well, very well put. Yes.
I like that. The memes are so powerful. It's incredible to think about, like that. I'm in the midst of reading it's René Girard,
Oh, right. Yeah.
What is
You
it?
know what's funny? It occurred to me to mention that as part of that answer.
Yeah.
But I thought, like, no, I don't want to have to explain what.
Don't have to go all the way into the history of acquisitive mimetics in this. That we're gonna need like 2 days for that, just nonstop. I need to finish it. I'm only about halfway through, but it's a fascinating exploration of that, and I'm sure some people would say that his analysis is too reductionist. But at the same time, it's like it all comes down to memes, right? And from the perspective of acquisitive mimetics, it's like you're just trying to copy things. Like we're all just, this is kind of how we're programmed, and you see so many examples of it throughout history, and then you start looking at that, and it's like, oh, I need a Miller Lite after this, you know. and we brought it back full circle.
Crush some instruments.
Yeah, I need to destroy some culture.
Hydraulic press.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate. You know, I'll ask you one more question that is just completely unrelated, and I don't think you can skirt it either, which is good.
I can't give an evasive non-answer to this one.
When you are not writing yourself, well, what are you reading right now? Or maybe what have you read recently that you really enjoyed and you'd recommend for others?
Yeah, it's an interesting time to ask this question just because since we got Axiom up and running, I just have way less time. And I've also shifted my writing. This has come up in a couple previous answers, I think, that I've shifted most of my writing to stuff that's for Axiom. And if it's not me writing it, it's like I'm putting a lot of time into editing it as well. And I actually think the most recent book I read, I'm just trying to think if I maybe read something light, like something maybe fiction-y over Christmas. Yeah, I did, but I don't even remember what it was. But the most recent nonfiction I read was actually Broken Money, which is excellent. Which is it's kind of boring as an answer for this show, I guess. You're probably hoping I go for maybe if I can remember. I do remember what it is. Right, so this is. I was gonna say it's better than Broken Money is amazing, but it's too on topic to be an interesting answer. Yeah, the novel that I actually finished because I'd started it years ago and it's friggin' huge, was Life and Fate by Vasily Grossman. It's very, very good. It's like 900 pages or something ridiculous.
Oh, dear Lord.
But I got like 600 pages into it, I think about 2 years ago, and then I finished that off.
We all have books like that, that it's like, oh, made it this far, like gonna finish this. Then you start reading something else at the same time. And whenever I do that, I end up like finishing the new book that I started and then not, going back to the old one. But I'll have to check that out. 900's a tall order, but
it's chunky. You can hurt someone with that book for sure.
Well, that's good. It's a good for the protection of one's private property, I suppose. Well, I appreciate your time very much here today. I appreciate the tangents that we were able to go on. For folks that I'll link your Nostr, I'll link your Twitter.
Cool.
Where should and maybe you have your website where you the Uncerto where you publish some stuff, but then you're also what's the Axiom website for people that want to check out it there?
AXIOMBTC.capital. That's the URL there.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I'll link that as well, just for folks. Thanks. I saw you guys. I want to dig into. You guys just published something recently about
just called
layers,
or this past weekend. Again, I don't know when this will come out, but
Okay. Well, good deal. I'm looking forward to digging into that. Maybe I'll read it. Sometimes I do read out loud episodes on this show, so perhaps I'll read it in a real sultry voice as a bedtime story for folks. But Alan,
are you trying to say that it'll put people to sleep?
No. But I've just been told sometimes, no matter what I read, my voice does put them to sleep if I read it too slowly. So it's not a you problem, Alan. It's a me problem.
It's not you, it's me.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's exactly what I'm saying. Well, Alan, I appreciate your time here.
Thanks for having me on.
Time is scarce, and wow, if we're talking about subjective valuations of time. We can
subjective valuations of subjective valuations.
Exactly, and but Bitcoin podcasts are abundant.
Do they have a theory?
I don't even think you can like that short circuits like that. The universe collapses into a black hole as soon as an MMT person starts thinking about subjective valuations of subjective valuations. I think that's just like we create we all collapse and die. But yeah, on that happy note, appreciate your time here. And looking forward to hopefully seeing you in the flesh one of these days soon. And until then, take it easy. Keep writing. Keep trolling.
Thanks very much.
And that's a wrap on this Bitcoin Talk episode of the Bitcoin Podcast. If you are a Bitcoin-only company interested in sponsoring another fucking Bitcoin podcast, head to bitcoinpodcast.net/sponsor. If you're enjoying the Bitcoin Podcast, consider giving a 5-star review wherever you listen or sharing this show with your network. Or don't. Bitcoin doesn't care. You can find me on Nostr by going to primal.net/Walker. And if you want to follow the Bitcoin Podcast on Twitter, go to @TitcoinPodcast and @WalkerAmerica. You can also find the video version of this podcast at youtube.com/@WalkerAmerica and @WalkerAmerica on Rumble. Bitcoin is scarce. There will only ever be 21 million, but Bitcoin podcasts are abundant. So thank you for spending your scarce time to listen to another fucking Bitcoin podcast. Until next time, stay free.